Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, June 12th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside, you can expect a high of 82.3 degrees today, with the temperature cooling down to a low of 65.6 degrees. Coming up on today's program, we are examining the situation regarding the United States and Iran, as they appear to be nearing a historic deal to put an end to their ongoing conflict. We will also investigate why federal authorities have moved to freeze funding for homelessness services throughout Los Angeles. Additionally, we will cover several other important stories making headlines today. We have a packed show for you, so be sure to stick around as we break down these developments and what they mean for the world around us. Stay tuned for all this and more on Alex's News. This morning, all eyes are on Geneva, where the United States and Iran could be just days away from ending a 3-month-old war. President Donald Trump says a, quote, grand bargain, end quote, could be signed as soon as this weekend. For the latest, we're joined by our reporter Ethan. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. It's quite a moment. The conflict, which the U.S. calls Operation Epic Fury, began on February 28, 2026, with joint U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. According to Strat News Global, thousands have died, mostly in Iran and Lebanon, and the Strait of Hormuz has been largely closed to commercial shipping for months. That's a choke point for roughly 1/5 of the world's seaborne oil and gas, so the global stakes here are enormous.
And the president himself broke the news yesterday. What exactly did he say?
That's right. On Thursday, June 11th, just 1 day ago, President Trump went on social media and said that, quote, discussions and final points have been, in both concept and great detail, approved by all parties involved, end quote. He also revealed he'd canceled scheduled strikes on Karg Island. NBC News notes that facility handles more than 90% of Iran's oil exports, so calling off those strikes was a major signal that Washington believes a deal is within reach.
Trump won't be in Geneva himself. Who's actually signing for the United States?
Vice President J.D. Vance has been designated as the official signatory. The president is staying in the U.S. to celebrate the nation's 250th anniversary. And there are real logistical signs this is happening. Axios and CNN are reporting that 4 U.S. Air Force C-17 transport planes were dispatched to Europe to carry equipment for Vance. The ceremony is tentatively expected in Geneva, Switzerland, as early as Sunday, June 14th, just 2 days from now.
So what's actually in this deal? I understand there's a draft circulating.
Yes, and this is where it gets complicated. The semi-official Mehr News Agency and the Iranian outlet WANA have circulated a 14-point draft memorandum of understanding. It's being called the Islamabad Declaration. The headline items include an immediate, permanent ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon, a U.S. commitment to non-interference in Iran's internal affairs, and the removal of the U.S. naval blockade, with the Strait of Hormuz reopening within 30 days.
That's the security side. What about the money?
The financial terms are striking. Iran would get immediate suspension of sanctions on its oil and petrochemicals. There's a release of $24 billion in frozen Iranian assets, with $12 billion made available even before formal talks begin. And then there's the most controversial line item, a requirement for the U.S. and its allies to provide a reconstruction plan for Iran valued at $300 billion. That number alone is going to ignite a political fight in Washington.
And on the nuclear question, which has driven this confrontation for years?
The draft sets a 60-day window to negotiate a final treaty, with Iran reaffirming its commitment to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. There's also a U.S. commitment to withdraw forces from the immediate periphery of Iran. But Grace, here's the catch. Iranian media claims that ballistic missile restrictions and support for regional proxy groups have been, quote, definitively removed, end quote, from the agenda. The White House flatly denies that.
How forcefully has the White House pushed back?
Very forcefully. Spokesperson Olivia Velez formally dismissed those Iranian claims as a, quote, complete fabrication, end quote. And as Bloomberg reports, the Trump administration insists any final deal will ensure Iran cannot develop nuclear weapons and will protect U.S. national security interests. So there's a real gap between what Tehran says is on the table and what Washington says is on the table, and that gap could blow up the entire ceremony.
Let's talk markets, because oil traders have been on a roller coaster. What are we seeing?
A dramatic move. RigZone reports Brent crude fell to roughly $90 a barrel, its lowest level since mid-April. President Trump credits the imminent peace deal, but analysts say there's a second, more physical reason. According to Bloomberg and RigZone, the U.S. drew down 15 million barrels from its strategic petroleum reserve in a single week. That's the largest weekly decline since the 1980s.
So Washington is essentially flooding the market while talking peace?
Exactly. Analysts say the peace rhetoric removed what's called the war premium from prices, while the SPR release provided the actual physical supply to push prices down. But there's a warning sign here. Fuel inventories in major hubs like Singapore remain at their lowest levels since 2013. So this relief at the pump may be fragile, and if Geneva falls apart, prices could snap right back up.
This conflict has clearly hurt the president politically. How much is that driving the rush to a deal?
Quite a bit, based on the reporting. Rising fuel prices have hurt his approval ratings, and according to Select Preferred and Reuters, many Republicans fear electoral fallout in the upcoming November midterms. So there's enormous domestic pressure to land a resolution that stabilizes energy markets while still claiming to have stopped Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That's the needle the administration is trying to thread.
Trump says regional powers are all on board. Is that actually true?
It's a mixed picture. He's claimed Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Israel have all approved the agreement. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has explicitly stated that Israel is, quote, not a party, end quote, to the memorandum. Netanyahu insists Israel will only support a deal that fully curbs Iran's nuclear program, its missile development, and its support for proxies like Hezbollah. So the closest U.S. ally in the region is publicly distancing itself.
And what about the Gulf states he mentioned?
There's better evidence of what's being called a Gulf-first consensus. Bloomberg reported that the UAE and Iran recently held their first face-to-face meeting since the war began, which suggests a real regional appetite for cooling things down. The Gulf monarchies have the most to lose from a shut Strait of Hormuz, so they're pushing hard for de-escalation, even if Israel isn't fully aligned with the terms.
I have to ask about the back channels here. There were some unusual names involved, weren't there?
Yes, and this part is fascinating. The groundwork for the deal was reportedly laid through unconventional channels, including secret talks in Oman. There were also tech-focused video conferences involving figures like Elon Musk, who was apparently acting as an informal envoy to discuss Iran's post-sanction modernization. So you have traditional shuttle diplomacy running in parallel with Silicon Valley figures talking about rebuilding the Iranian economy.
Ethan, we've heard imminent deal claims before. How seriously should listeners take this one?
With real caution. Since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th, President Trump has claimed a peace deal was imminent or close at least 38 times. CNN reports that previous instances, like the Pakistan-brokered ceasefire in April or the, quote, largely negotiated, end quote, claims in May, were followed by further military escalation or shifting White House demands. So veteran diplomats are skeptical, and rightly so.
What's Tehran saying right now, today?
The Iranian Foreign Ministry, through spokesperson Ismail Beghai, is cautioning that while large parts of the text are finalized, no final decision has been made, and the situation on the ground is still hot. The naval blockade remains in effect, and NBC News reported that U.S. forces shot down 2 Iranian drones just last night. So the war isn't paused. It's still very active, even as the ink is supposedly drying.
So what should we be watching for over the next 48 hours?
3 things, Grace. First, whether Vice President Vance actually arrives in Geneva, and the ceremony proceeds Sunday, June 14th. Second, whether the final text matches the Iranian 14-point version or the much narrower White House version, especially on missiles and proxies. And third, watch Israel. If Netanyahu signals he'll act unilaterally, this entire framework could collapse before the signatures dry. If it holds, This would be the most significant diplomatic shift in the Middle East in decades.
Remarkable stakes, and a lot to track this weekend. Ethan, thank you for walking us through it.
My pleasure, Grace.
And now to our second big story this morning, a major shakeup in how Los Angeles handles its homelessness crisis. The federal government has just pulled the plug on funding for the region's lead agency. Here to walk us through it is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yeah, this is a really significant moment for Los Angeles. Just yesterday, on June 11th, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development officially suspended all federal homelessness funding to the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, known as LAHSA. HUD officials cited what they called, quote, wanton mismanagement of public funds, end quote, and a clear pattern of fraud. We're talking about roughly $200 million a year in federal grants now, on ice.
$200 million is a staggering number. Who's actually driving this decision out of Washington?
This was spearheaded by HUD Secretary Scott Turner, working alongside the White House Task Force to eliminate fraud, which is being led by Vice President J.D. Vance. According to CalMatters, that federal money is essentially the lifeblood for service providers managing the largest homeless population in the country. So pulling it out, even temporarily, sends shockwaves through the entire system. And the suspension itself happened just one day ago, so providers are still trying to figure out what comes next.
Let's get into the why. What specifically is HUD pointing to as evidence of fraud?
HUD says the failures here are, quote, severe and pervasive, end quote. That language comes from a letter sent by HUD Deputy Secretary Andrew Hughes, as reported by LAist. The core allegation is that LAHSA repeatedly certified it had adequate financial controls and conflict of interest safeguards, when it really did not. And there are several specific cases that federal officials are citing to back this up, some of them quite shocking.
Walk us through some of those cases. What stands out the most?
Probably the Sufer case back in January of this year, so about 5 months ago. Federal and county prosecutors charged Alexander Sufer, a director of a South LA charity contracted by LAHSA. According to Fox News and LAist, he's accused of stealing $10 million out of the $23 million he received in homeless funds. Prosecutors allege he used the money on personal luxuries, including a $7 million home and private jet travel.
Wow, and I understand there's also a case involving a shelter where the bed count didn't add up?
That's right, and a federal judge actually called it, quote, obvious fraud, end quote. This came up last year in the federal case, LA Alliance for Human Rights versus City of Los Angeles. U.S. District Judge David O. Carter found that at the Lincoln Safe Sleep Village, LAHSA was reporting 88 beds. But when the court inspected, there were only 44 beds actually there. Despite that, Fox News reports LAHSA kept paying the provider based on the full 88-bed capacity.
That's hard to wrap your head around. Were there problems at the very top of the agency as well?
Yes, and this is part of why the credibility crisis runs so deep. Former CEO VA Leisha Adams Kellum resigned last year after it came out that she had directed $2.1 million in federal funds to a nonprofit that employed her husband. On top of that, HUD says LAHSA couldn't verify the existence of nearly 2,300 housing sites it was supposed to be overseeing. And a November 2024 City Controller's audit, reported by CalMatters, found LAHSA had failed to spend $513 million that was already budgeted for fiscal year 2024.
So a real pattern there. But this freeze isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? There's a bigger policy shift in the background.
Exactly, Grace. The Trump administration is using this moment to push a major ideological overhaul of federal homelessness policy. They're moving to dismantle what's called Housing First, which prioritizes getting people into housing immediately without preconditions. In its place, they want a Recovery First model that emphasizes sobriety, work requirements, and temporary shelter. It's really a fundamental rethinking of how we approach homelessness in this country.
How is that showing up in the actual rules for funding?
According to CalMatters, HUD's new grant rules for the $4.04 billion Continuum of Care program now cap the amount of funds that can go toward permanent supportive housing at roughly 30%. That's a sharp decrease from previous years. And Secretary Turner hasn't minced words about Los Angeles, calling it a, quote, fraud-filled homelessness industrial complex that lines the pockets of left-wing NGOs, end quote. That quote comes from reporting by both Fox News and LAist.
Strong language. What's the projected real-world impact of these policy shifts in California specifically?
The numbers are sobering. The National Alliance to End Homelessness estimates these policy shifts could cost California nearly $238 million overall, and potentially 15,000 people could lose the housing they currently have. So even before this Ley Essa suspension, advocates were already warning about a humanitarian crisis brewing. Now that $200 million freeze just pours fuel on the fire.
Let's turn to the local response. How are LA officials reacting?
It's a mix of alarm and defiance. LAHSA spokesperson Ahmad Chapman called the suspension a, quote, blatant attempt to pull yet more resources from Los Angeles, end quote. He pointed out, in coverage from LAist and CalMatters, that LAHSA was already modernizing its financial systems with help from the firm KPMG. So the agency's position is essentially, we know there are problems, we're fixing them, don't punish the people we serve.
And what about the elected officials? What's Mayor Karen Bass saying?
Mayor Bass acknowledged she has, quote, grave concerns, end quote, about LAHSA's management. But she pushed back hard on the federal approach, saying that threatening federal funds, quote, does nothing to house people, end quote. She also warned that, quote, ultimately, people will lose their lives, end quote. Meanwhile, LA County Supervisor Lindsay Horvath was even more blunt, calling the HUD suspension a, quote, publicity stunt, end quote. That's per LAist and Fox News.
I understand local government had already been pulling back from LAHSA even before this, is that right?
That's a really important piece of context, Grace. Even before HUD acted, local leaders were distancing themselves. The LA County Board of Supervisors previously voted to pull more than $300 million a year away from LAHSA, so the county can manage its own homelessness dollars through a new department. And the LA City Council has been exploring bypassing law entirely to contract directly with service providers. So in some ways, the federal government is hitting an agency that was already on shaky ground locally.
Let's talk about the math here. How does the confirmed fraud compare to what's actually being frozen?
This is one of the most interesting tensions in the story. According to LAist, the total amount of confirmed criminal fraud linked to LAHSA stands at roughly $25.1 million. But HUD has frozen $200 million in funding. So critics argue the response is disproportionate to the actual proven wrongdoing. The HUD Office of Inspector General investigation began yesterday, on June 11th, and it's expected to take over 300 days to complete. During that whole period, LAHSA is barred from federal funding competitions.
That's nearly a year. Are there local sources of money that could fill the gap?
There are some, but they fall short. Measure A, passed in 2024, is a 0.5% sales tax that includes what's called a local solutions fund. But its $100 million annual budget is only half of that $200 million federal hole. Then there's Measure ER, which voters approved earlier this year, also a 0.5% sales tax for the emergency safety net. The problem is that revenue won't be available until October of this year, about 4 months from today.
So a real timing crunch. Does LAHSA have any legal options to fight back?
Yes. LAHSA has 30 days to contest the suspension. Legal analysts say the agency could file a lawsuit under the Administrative Procedure Act, arguing the freeze is, quote, arbitrary and capricious, end quote. But without immediate federal or state intervention, local officials are warning of a $303 million deficit. And they say up to 15,000 residents currently supported by Housing First grants could be displaced, so the human stakes here are enormous.
A story with massive implications for one of the country's biggest cities. Chloe, thanks so much for breaking this all down for us this morning.
Happy to do it, Grace. We'll keep following every twist as that OIG investigation moves forward.
Here are some other headlines. SpaceX is making a stellar debut on the NASDAQ today, June 12, 2026, in a launch that has investors feeling over the moon as the company orbits a record-breaking valuation of $1,770 billion. By pricing 555,600,000 shares at $135 each, the firm raised $75 billion, which really rockets them past the previous initial public offering record held by Saudi Aramco. The demand was astronomical, pulling in over $250 billion in total interest, with 30% of the float specifically reserved for retail investors hoping to catch a shooting star. This giant leap for CEO Elon Musk could see his net worth eclipse $980 billion, putting him on a trajectory to become the world's first trillionaire. This deal also integrates his artificial intelligence venture, xAI, to help build some smart orbital infrastructure. While Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Paul Atkins is keeping things down to earth with a back-to-basics regulatory shift, the debut has faced some heat from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is raising a red flag over the high valuation and a lack of standard profitability. Next, we turn to Orlando, Florida, where things have reached a bit of a crossroads for the Southern Baptist Convention. Messengers have voted to alter their constitution with the Truth and Unity Amendment, which would officially bar churches from having women pastors. This move, proposed by Albert Mohler, received a landslide 74.66% of the vote, representing 6,028 to 2,026 supporters. The convention is definitely preaching to the choir of tradition, specifying that churches cannot endorse women who function as pastors or overseers who preach to the congregation. Newly elected President Willie Rice is happy to shepherd the flock away from what he describes as a liberal drift. However, the church isn't out of the woods yet. They will have to cross that bridge again in 2027 for a second two-thirds ratification vote in Indianapolis. Moving to the pitch, the United States men's national team is ready to kickstart their 2026 World Cup journey tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. They are facing off against Paraguay at the stadium in Inglewood, and fans are hoping for a pitch-perfect performance. This is the first time the United States has hosted a match for this tournament since 1994, and coach Mauricio Pochettino is ready to lead this golden generation, featuring star forward Christian Pulisic through the expanded 48-team field. It is a massive networking event for North America, with a total of 104 matches shared across 3 countries. In Washington, President Trump is spying a potential successor for the Director of National Intelligence. He has nominated Jay Clayton, the former Securities and Exchange Commission chairman, to the post which coordinates 18 separate agencies. This nomination is an intelligent move to end a stalemate over the reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Clayton is stepping in after his predecessor faced some heavy tackles from lawmakers for a lack of experience. A confirmation hearing is already on the calendar for June 17th. Finally, there is some trouble over the water, as the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge has been suspended. The $6.4 billion project was halted just one day before the ribbon cutting due to unresolved issues between the United States and Canada. President Trump has been pushing for a 50% ownership stake, which has really crossed the line for some officials. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says there is no big drama, but for now the busiest trade corridor in North America is still waiting to bridge the gap. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.